Hey guys, so today I just thought I wanted to share a bit of news with you about Linux. Now, for those of you who are not particularly technologically inclined, or at least Linux inclined, you're probably not going to find this video particularly interesting. But today, I would like to share with you a bit of news for those of you that do follow Linux and do follow the horse race between the Linux distributions. Because quite a bit of interesting news has come up on OMG Ubuntu today that Debian switches to Xfce by default and will evaluate its demand for GNOME. And this is particularly interesting. It's referring to the upcoming release. You can see here Debian 8.0 codename Jessie. Now, at the moment, Debian 8.0 hasn't got a release date, but because Debian 7 has just come out. So we can possibly expect Debian 8.0 to come out in 2 years if we're lucky. But the reasons they're outlined here. With accessibility support, particularly for the visually impaired users, which is something I've got to admit I often overlook because I myself don't use those particular features. Xfce being closer to the GNOME 2 experience and CD space constraints. Now, I imagine there are a few other reasons, possibly ones including resource use and things like that as well. And of course, yeah, the CD space requirements, that's probably probably an aspect of it as well, although I don't expect it's probably the be-all and end-all one. But the interesting reason out of that is Xfce being closer to the GNOME 2 experience, because that to me kind of sums up what Debian want to do with their distribution and what their aims are. You see, GNOME 3 recently switched to a whole new user interface, which looked a lot more like it belonged on mobile devices. And I kind of have that insinuation, and I know a lot of other people do as well, that GNOME 3 is eventually going to end up on devices because it does look very similar. It's got like an Android feel to it. So it could very well be an interface that we do see on mobile platforms in the future. And with Debian is designed with, well, versatility in mind, really. It's designed to be, in a lot of cases, a base distribution, a distribution that other Linux distributions can work off of. And it works incredibly well as that. As we know, Ubuntu uses Debian as its base distribution, and Linux Mint, of course, uses Ubuntu, which, of course, in turn uses Debian as its base distribution. Debian is very, very good at providing a very stable foundation for a wide section of the Linux distribution community. So what you don't want to see out of Debian is drastic changes, and Debian kind of is forced to go along with GNOME 3 if it decides to retain GNOME as its default interface, and that doesn't really fit in with the ethos of GNOME's ethos and Debian's ethos are kind of at a crossroads now, and it kind of does make sense that a reasonably conservative and reserved distribution like Debian does look to a more conservative and reserved desktop interface to be its for its flagship distribution. So I can kind of understand that, and I definitely agree with it as well. Xfce not being as radical as GNOME, or I mean, KDE is kind of radical. In some ways, it's very resource intensive as well, and in some ways, it's possibly not even as stable as Debian users would like. But apart from Debian being a base distribution, a foundation that other Linux distributions can base themselves off, it's also a fantastic server environment. It's a very good distribution for servers, and it's used very widely on servers, and that's probably where one of its widest uses are. And you can't afford to have an unstable server. Too many, especially if it's a server that serves a lot of people. That being said, those server distributions of Debian, a lot of people I know who run servers, they prefer to do it from the command line anyway. So desktop interface isn't top of their priority list. And with that being said, they probably don't need a fancy desktop as well. And some of them run it directly from the complete command line without X installed at all. So in all, I guess I support this decision, and it kind of is a controversial one, but it's not really. But it's controversial because you're arguing about whether or not it's controversial sometimes, because they, to me, have gone with Xfce as their flagship desktop interface, because they wanted to remain more reserved in their in their planning out stages. But this is, of course, in 2 years' time, and it does say in this article here that you can read that they do intend to reevaluate it after it's been released. And of course, most people who use Debian are Linux aficionados, so they are not going to be particularly out of out of their depth when it comes to changing their desktop environment anyway. So it's really probably not as major a change as it seems at surface value. It's not as big a change as, say, Ubuntu changing from GNOME to Unity, which I think was a mistake. I keep trying to get on with Unity. Every now and then I'll try and pick it up and see if I can get back into it, but I can't. It's an interface that was designed for mobile apps, mobile phones, and tablets and so forth, and it just will not fly on a desktop as far as I can see. And GNOME's a bit like that now. I quite like Cinnamon, which is one of the default desktop environments for Linux Mint. If I wasn't using Cinnamon, I'd probably be using LXDE, because it just takes away all the bells and whistles that I personally never use, and and you save a ton on memory, on loading things, on fancy effects, and you just manage to get to do what you want to do with very little getting in the way. And Xfce is probably my choice next to LXDE. So anyway, guys, that's just a few thoughts that I had on this new bit of news. And I also wanted to try out doing more videos like this, because they're nice, they're quick, they're easy to do, and it means that I could perhaps cover more niche topics without having to dedicate a lot of time to them. So guys, please let me know what you think down in the comment section below, whether or not you think this is big news, whether or not you use Debian, and whether or not this story sort of affects you, whether or not you're interested in it. But personally, it's just one of those little things that I like. And also, in case you were wondering, that big banner at the top that says the Ubuntu got the Big Brother Award. I'm not familiar with what the Big Brother Award is, but I am familiar with how it was acquired. Basically, Unity uses a menu. What do they call it? A lens, but it's basically it's a menu that allows you to search from Amazon, and that lens, that menu, actually keeps track of your searches from your desktop. So it's not even sort of recording your activity online, although it is kind of online. But it's really quite invasive in terms of how it actually records your your personal searches, and it will try and advertise based on your search results, and it will clock that information, which, to be honest, is something that I personally feel uncomfortable with at that level. When it's getting involved in my desktop, when it's getting involved in stuff that's outside of my internet browser, I am a bit weary of it. You can turn it off. It is it is quite easy to turn it off. But that being said, of course, is that Ubuntu, which of course is sponsored by Canonical, is a company, and they do need to make money out of this. Whereas, like, say, Linux Mint and Debian, you could argue are, even though they're professional projects and there are people working full time on them, and they're very grand and they're fantastic, it's not as corporate orientated as Ubuntu. Ubuntu is probably the most corporate oriented Linux distribution, possibly next to SUSE/OpenSUSE and Red Hat/Fedora. Both of those are kind of corporate orientated, but they're done so in a very tried and tested model in a very obvious way. Ubuntu seems to be very corporate in terms of the consumer end, and I'm not sure how invasive that can be, and I'm not sure how much it's going to take away from the end user experience. Probably quite a lot, which is one of the reasons why I don't personally feel like I use it. I am very comfortable with Linux Mint. Linux Mint does exactly what a Linux distribution for desktop users should do, and it does it as easy as it possibly can. And I do not feel that Linux Mint is going to turn around overnight and do a drastic user interface decision in the same way that Ubuntu did with Unity. So, I kind of feel like I'm in safer hands with Linux Mint. But anyway, that's just a few thoughts of mine. Thank you very much for watching. Please let me know what you think down in the comment section below. And until next time, I've been Chris Ware, and you've been awesome. Take care now.